Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Stephanie Slater and Julie Dart. This is a big, absolutely unbelievable case. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! As you can see, there are changes to the usual situation for Sin and Tonic. I've done my best because this week has been... At the end of this video, I will explain why I am inside in the old way. Like, this is how I first filmed Sin and Tonic. Cray. So yeah, I'll fill you in at the end. But we do need to crack on because today's story is a banger. Like I said, it really is. Also, because of what's happened this week, I have had to film in the morning. So there is no gin in this mug. In this vessel, there is coffee, strong coffee. Without further ado, we are going to Birmingham. We're going to begin our story. It is a story of two parts, well, almost three, but we're going to focus on two parts of it. And we will begin with Stephanie Slater. At the time of our story, she is 25 years old and she is an estate agent in Birmingham. She had only been working for her current employer, which was called Shipways Estate Agents, so that quick, for 6 weeks. I feel like my mouth isn't working today. On the 22nd of January 1992, Stephanie Slater would begin a horrific ordeal. She has gone to work and in her diary for that day, she has got a meeting with a potential buyer of a property. Nothing unusual there. This is what estate agents do. So she's due to go and meet this fella at the house. However, there is something slightly unusual about how this has all come about, because the guy didn't just ring the office and say, "Oh, hi, I'm interested in buying blah, blah, blah," and book an appointment that way, which would be usual. This appointment was made by letter. Now that is weird. I know we're in 1992, but that is weird, isn't it? It's not like, the Victorian era. I shall pen you my arrangements. Because of this weirdness, Stephanie wasn't really expecting the person to show up. The person hadn't confirmed that they were going to meet her there. So it was a bit like, it's not really going to happen. So she thought. The property was only a 2-minute drive away from their offices, the Shipway offices. And she got into her car, she drove around there, and lo and behold, there was somebody there to meet her. He'd given his name in the letter as Mr. Southall, so she greeted him and they went into the house. Bit of a grim thing in the winter, actually, because if the houses are vacant, they're not heated, so you're just wandering around some cold house. She didn't really want to be there, and she got the feeling that he wasn't interested either. You probably get that vibe. You can tell, can't you? When you walk around a house and you're like, "Oh my God, yes." And you start talking about where your furniture's going to go, what you're going to, take me over there, that'd be so cute, all that crap. That's but she was getting none of this. He was quite quiet, asked very few questions and was uneasy, a bit weird. So she took him upstairs. She let him look around by himself. She went into a bedroom while he pottered about, and then she met him out on the landing. She was then going to just make her way back downstairs and end the viewing effectively, because she wanted to go back to her nice warm office and have a cup of tea. At this point, that was my foot on my chair. Sorry, I did not toot. Would I tell you if I had though? No. He then has a question about something that is in the bathroom, I believe. "Oh, what's that up there?" And because he had pointed to something and the nature of the question, she moved herself into the bathroom and she looked at whatever it was he had pointed at. Some sort of hook, I think it was. And, she's like, "Oh, I think that's where you would hang a towel." It was very mundane, almost stupid question. What the hell do you think it is, mate? And then with that, when she turned around, this is when all hell breaks loose. She turns around and she sees flashes of silver. and she realises quickly that he is going to attack her and that he's got weapons. He's got 2 weapons. One is a chisel and one is a knife. And he does attack her. He's trying to force her into the bath and he's hurting her. She ends up with cuts to her face. Some of her hair is cut off in this tussle. And he's not a huge man. So there really is a fight. Stephanie believed at this point that he was going to try and sexually assault her. And she really did fight back. So much so that she managed to bend the chisel. Yes. So the chisel is now out of the game. It's useless. She also managed to get a hold of the knife. In an interview that I watched, when she was describing their fight, she said something like, I can't remember her exact words, but like, I was just like, what, you grubby little man? She's like, I'm not going to let you do this to me. And had this like, no, grubby little man. Love that. She had the knife. So did he. So they were really fighting for it. And he kept telling her to let go of it and she would not. Sadly for Stephanie, he manages to overpower her and he manages to push her, like he basically sort of contorts her into the bath. And at that point, he then has the knife to her throat. And he says, do not scream or, I'm going to kill you. Stephanie thought quickly here. She changed really because she thought, okay, well now I'm in danger. So she switched from fight mode to survival. And she said to him, she reminded him, and I think she reminded him a lot throughout the story, that she was a human. Like, please don't harm me. I'm a human being. And she tried to really tap into that, like I'm a person. He tied her up and he tied a noose around her neck and he held that from behind as he walked her down the stairs, a bit like a dog lead sort of thing. At the bottom of the stairs, she realised that this wasn't about sexual assault because he blindfolded her, he gagged her, and then he walked her out to his car. So they were in an empty, vacant house. Like, she'd already been screaming and shouting when they were having their fight and nobody had come to her rescue. So if this was about anything else, that would have happened at the house at that point, you would think, if that's what his aim of the game was. But no, he blindfolds her, he gags her, and he puts her in his car. Now, that is just terrifying because what is this? And then they embark on a very long journey. He ends up driving 70 miles from, I think they were in somewhere called Great Bar. I didn't write it down, silly me. I think it was Great Bar. And then they drove to Newark. Obviously, at the time, Stephanie didn't know where they were going and she couldn't see, but that's where he went. On this journey, after a little while, he would pull over and he would talk to Stephanie. Now, he'd blindfolded her and gagged her, so obviously she's like, anyone driving past, like, what? Not normal. So he'd laid, the passenger seat, he'd like laid that down. So she was in the car, but no one could see her. Where they had pulled over, she had noticed that the traffic had become less and less loud. And when they pulled over, she couldn't hear traffic anymore. So he'd obviously picked a really secluded spot. At this point, he sits Stephanie up in the passenger seat and he has the knife to her again. So she's stuck. He explains to Stephanie at this point that she has been kidnapped. No shit, Sherlock. Nevertheless, it's so unusual, and she's not from a rich, affluent family by any means. So she must have been like, what? Jeez. Anyway, he goes on to explain that he is not going to be asking for the ransom money from her family, but from the company that she works for, from Shipways, and that he would like £175,000 for her safe return. He then gives her a tape recorder thingy and makes her record a tape message for Shipways with instructions about what to do and just to say, proof of life, basically, proof that he's got her. At this point, Shipways have no idea that she is actually missing because, well, they're starting to worry, but they don't really know what's going on at all. They have driven past the house that she was showing and noticed that her car was still there. So they just thought, maybe it's just a long viewing. He's got loads of questions, whatever. Then the time adds up and she's been gone for 3 hours. That's not a viewing, is it? Who's looking around a house for 3 hours? Unless it's very, very big. And then the office receives a phone call. This phone call is from the kidnapper. And he says that there will be a letter on the way with instructions for her release and for her ransom. And in the meantime, they are not to contact the police, blah, blah, blah. Also, what is with this dude and letters? You've just rung. Why not just give your demands over the phone? What? Oh, I've sent you a letter, so just please wait for that to arrive. Also, mate, Royal Mail, what if it never comes? You're waiting a long time. Kevin Watts is the boss at Shipways, and he calls the big boss, who says, right, you do need to call the police. We do have to involve the police. We cannot do this by ourselves, which they do. Kevin calls the police and he explains the nature of what has happened, and, it's delicate, and please can we be discreet in case, someone's watching the office or whatever. And the police proceed to send uniformed officers to Shipways offices and the property where Stephanie had gone missing from. Doesn't it make you cross sometimes? Really? Quite quickly they realise their mistake and they send ununiformed, what is the word? Plainclothes officers, she says, to the office, and it's a bit late, isn't it, really? But yeah, so they whip the uniform ones off and put, undercover ones in. They find that Stephanie's car is still at the property where she was showing that gentleman, Mr. Southall. They also find blood in the bathtub, which is where Stephanie was attacked, and they also find her hair, because her hair was being cut and things like that. So it's not looking good. This is quite a worrying sign for the police. This is when the terrifying ordeal begins for Stephanie's parents, because the police inform them that she's been abducted, which must be terrifying, but also bad. What the hell? It just doesn't happen, does it? Honestly, this case, I was is this real? It's something out of a movie, isn't it? They inform her that she's been abducted. They also then, and I thought this was clever, they go to the sorting office. Yeah, they go to the sorting office to intercept the mail, the post, to get this letter. They want it quicker than, the next day. They find it. I was like, what? Yeah. So they sort through all the post. They find it, and it has got the tape recording that Stephanie made in it, as well as instructions for her ransom. And then they have to play that tape to her parents to identify her voice. Back in the car, they've driven on a certain amount, and then he pulls over again. She's still blindfolded and gagged. And then they pull over, he sits her up, and he offers her a cup of tea and a ham sarnie. Ham sandwich? I mean, I know that she's, she hasn't eaten and had anything to drink, but crikey. And again, in her interview, love some of the little quotes that she said. She said in her mind, she was thinking, what? You're offering me a bloody picnic? She just, really? All of this, and now you're offering me a ham sarnie? They keep driving, quite a long journey, and they arrive at what Stephanie describes as a workshop. So even though she's blindfolded, obviously she can smell things, she can feel what the floor feels like underfoot, and she describes it as a workshop. There's a big metal door that gets slid open, things like that. And she's taken inside. She's tied to a chair, and then he proceeds to stroke her hair, run his fingers through her hair. She does say at this point she just had visions in her mind of horror films. So did I. As she was saying that, I was like, yeah, me too. Stroking, just standing there stroking her hair. And she thought this is it. this is when he's going to chop my head off with an axe or something. She was terrified. He then asked Stephanie to undress and get changed into the clothes that he had provided. And she refused, and that made him really angry. And at that point, he mentioned to her the name of an estate agent that had gone missing in the 80s, Susie Lamplugh. It wasn't until 1993, so after when we were talking about, but she was then declared dead. They hadn't found her body, but they declared her dead at that point. And it terrified Stephanie, because I think it kind of implied that he'd done harm to Susie, and it scared Stephanie. So she did what he asked her to do, and she got undressed. Sadly, this is when the grubby little man would sexually assault Stephanie and then gave her men's clothing to wear. He then assured her that that would not happen again and that it was rubbish anyway. Peace. And this is where it gets spicy. Now, you say, yeah. He then asks Stephanie if she is claustrophobic. That very question would have me like, yeah, get me out, get me out. I'm not particularly, but when you're in that situation, yeah, I am, mate. Also, why'd you ask, knob? Because you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. He then placed Stephanie into a makeshift coffin. That is all how I would describe it. Basically, a wheelie bin on its side. I'll share some photos. It was locked at the top, so once she was in it, it was locked. She could not get out. He then also handcuffed her hands above her head. It just sounds so incredibly painful and uncomfortable. To get into it, she had to be sort of twisted, like her body, and really, really uncomfy, and her arms above her head, handcuffed to a metal pole, which he said if she pulled on that, the rocks and the bricks and stuff above her, placed sort of above her on the makeshift coffin, would crush her to death. So she couldn't pull down on this bar. He let her feel, everything. She was still blindfolded. Let her feel this contraption that she was being placed into, so that she knew he wasn't, lying, and that she would die if she pulled on the bar. And then she felt something sharp, like going up her trouser leg. And he had put electrodes. And he said, if you move, you will be electrocuted to death. And then he locked her in and he left for the night. While Stephanie was left to endure this night of pure hell, basically, back at home, things were not going any better. The West Midlands Police had called on the West Yorkshire Police, Yorkshire, to help with their investigation. And it was quickly determined that there was a link with a case that the West Yorkshire Police were working on, and it was a bad link to have. They were working on the case of Julie Dart. When the West Yorkshire Police looked at the ransom note in Stephanie's kidnap, they quickly saw lots of similarities between Julie Dart's case and Stephanie's. The year before, in 1991, Julie Dart's boyfriend received a letter in the post. This letter said that Julie had been kidnapped and that he was asking for ransom. Same week, the West Yorkshire Police received a letter which was quickly linked to Julie Dart's boyfriend's letter. This letter said that he was asking for £140,000 ransom for a prostitute that he had kidnapped from the city centre. Also, it said if he did not receive the ransom, he was going to bomb a shop, as well as kill the girl that he had kidnapped. On the 16th of July 1991, the Vice Squad followed the demands and the instructions in the letter, the ransom letter, and it just fell flat because the kidnapper did not ring. So I think it obviously sent them to some phone box or something like that, but the kidnapper never rang. Sadly, a week later, Julie Dart's body was found next to an abandoned train line, wrapped in a towel, and it was quite badly decomposed. so much so that the original autopsy was inconclusive. The autopsy did show that Julie had 2 blunt force injuries to the back of her head that were likely caused by a hammer blow, but that they weren't enough to have been her cause of death. And then the kidnapper sent another letter to the police. He said it was regrettable that Julie had to die and that would happen again if they didn't follow his instructions, but he didn't even do. It's very annoying. He then, in the letter, described how he had murdered Julie, and he said he had hit her on the back of the head with a hammer and then he had strangled her. The letter said that he wanted the same amount of money, again, 140,000, or he would take another victim, another girl. And the police really wanted to catch this guy, so they played along with the instructions that he'd left. And then they sent this officer into the phone box as requested, certain phone box somewhere, and she couldn't hear. She couldn't hear the instructions. They were being played on a tape recorder down the phone, and it was impossible. She could not hear anything. She made out one word like services or something. Oh, yeah, easy. And that was it. And she could not believe it. She couldn't hear it. He then rearranged the ransom drop by letter, of course. Reliable letter. This was rearranged for the 14th of August 1991. And in this letter, he said he had already taken another victim, Sarah Davies, and he said that he'd taken her from Ipswich and a particular road. So he'd given quite a lot of information about Sarah. Sorry, I had to put my hair up. I've got quite hot. Not even drinking a gin. He gave the officer directions to a phone box in Wakefield. You could not write this. You could not write this. Because the phone makes you realise why everything's in a letter, right? Because the phone jammed. Like the phone receiver thing jammed, so you couldn't answer the phone. What? Oh my word! That it's just like it makes my palms sweat. Do you know what I mean? What about this Sarah Davis? Oh my god, he never called back. So this is an absolute like shit show, isn't it? He never called back. The phone was jammed, and it all just fizzled out. Luckily, the police investigators thought that Sarah Davis was made up. They had not had a report of a missing person, especially not like a Sarah Davies, and nobody had gone missing from that area, that road, and there wasn't even a Sarah Davies. What? There wasn't even a Sarah Davies at that address. So they think it was just a lie. The next day, there were some discoveries made, and it blows your mind. It's like out of a movie. This case, I feel like a broken record, but it really is. So they found basically his instructions, like, you know, a ransom. It'd be like, go here, now do this, now go here. Somebody found a letter with instructions in a phone box, and they handed that into police because they were like, oh, that's weird, because it's like a ransom, you know, like a thing. So they found that, they followed that, and then they found some more things and some more instructions, and they were next to a white, or tied to a white brick. It was a painted brick, so it was actually a blue brick, very unusual and very rare, and it was painted white. They also found like a dog lead, a retractable dog lead, at the place where the instructions said that to make the drop, so that he could then pull the money, if you like, well, yeah, the ransom, up onto the bridge above. So he'd thought it all through, this guy. It was all set out, but they didn't answer the phone because it was broken. They also found, do you remember he said he was going to bomb a shop? They also found a fake device, but they didn't know and they weren't sure that it was fake. So they had to get the bomb squad in, causing all sorts of trouble, didn't they, to blow it up. And when they had done that, they had remnants of it left. And it was like this sort of grey pot. An officer saw it, this piece of grey plastic in a certain shape. And he was like, oh, I know what that is. And he brought in, you know, his pot of fish food, and it was a pot of fish food in a previous life. This guy had used it to fake a bomb or device. give him a Blue Peter badge. 2 days later, guess what? A letter arrives at the police station saying, I give up. I give up for now, like you're useless at this game, and I will rethink it and I will be back. He did leave the police alone for then, but then he wrote a letter in the October to British Rail. He said he wanted £200,000 or he would derail an express train. That's terrifying. Who is this guy? Again, he gave instructions by letter. The police looked at these letters, they compared them to Julie Dart's case, and they were the same person. They determined that this was the same guy. The police made kind of like the brave decision, I would say, to not follow his demands. When I say brave, I don't mean that I think how it comes across, because I think that they were playing with people's lives there a bit. Because this is somebody that has kidnapped and actually murdered somebody. He has murdered Julie Dart. This isn't just, I can understand not giving in to the demands if nothing's happened and you think it's just some nut job writing in. But this guy, well, he is a nut job, but he's murdered somebody. So they chose not to play the game this time. And they were kind of lucky, really, because he did try to cause mayhem on the train line. They found that he had dangled like a very heavy rock from a bridge, and this had been smashed to pieces by a train, but it very easily could have smashed the window of a train, which would have caused injury to the train driver or worse, and possibly derailed a train, because if your train driver is kaput, what happens then? Police were then left wondering what next. Sadly, that would be the kidnap of Stephanie Slater, and the police now know how this ended for Julie Dart, and that is terrifying. Stephanie survived her night in her hellish box. Barely. She was freezing. She was in a warehouse in January, up north. That in itself is like, yeah, icebox. No blanket, nothing. In a freaking warehouse in the middle of nowhere. She shivered head to toe. At one point, she thought she had actually died because she could see a light at the end of the coffin and the vision of Jesus, but she'd actually fallen asleep. I can't believe she made it through that night, actually. Also, she was so cold that her arms went numb, and she kept thinking, I can't feel my arms, and if she pulled on that bar, the rocks were going to crush her. So she was terrified, and she did fall asleep, so the rocks did not fall, thankfully, but crumbs. In the morning, the kidnapper came back to the warehouse. He undid the coffin. We're going to call it a coffin. And he got her out, and he was genuinely shocked at her state. He hadn't expected her to be so unwell, freezing cold. So he sat her on a chair and he gave her a cup of tea, which she could barely hold. She couldn't really even drink it. She was so frozen. She was like a block of ice, bless her. And then he took the tea away from her and he rubbed her arms, sort of like, like to warm her up. And he was like, is that better? And then he gave her the tea again. This was a small glimpse of humanity to Stephanie. But over the next few days, he would, go from being kind and nice to her to scaring her and being horrible. So it was like Jekyll and Hyde. You don't know where you're at with that. That's terrifying. He feeds her. He makes sure that she has fresh clothes. And she can hear all the time. She has her blindfold on as well all the time. But she can hear him working. So she works out that he's got like a shop or something at the front of this warehouse. She can sometimes hear people come and go. And she can hear like a microwave. She can hear the radio, which is on all day while he's working. She thinks she can hear like a till, an old-fashioned till, like ding, when it rings up, ding. The phone rings. So he's there. He's there during the day. This is his place of business. She is frustratingly close to his customers. He runs a tool repair shop. So they bring their tools in and then he spends the day working on them and mending them. And they come and go. And she just doesn't scream. She doesn't do anything to rock the boat or to piss him off. She is incredibly compliant. She keeps her blindfold on. She does as she is told. She doesn't waver from any of his rules. And maybe that is what keeps her alive. His wife comes every day with his lunch. It always blows my mind. These crazy things are going on behind closed doors, and then they're just like, oh, yes, dear, having their normal life, going to work, wifey, all that sort of business. It just shocks me. I'm always surprised by it. Over the next week, Stephanie builds a rapport with her captor. She notices that he is quite a quiet man in his life. He doesn't seem to chat very much with customers. He doesn't seem to talk much with his wife. He's quiet. But he likes talking with Stephanie. So she uses that to her advantage. She shows an interest. She listens to him. She even gets to a point where she can joke with him and be jovial. Back at home, the police have tapped the Shipways phone lines in case he calls again. And they've also tapped her parents' house, the phone line there. Police liaison officers are staying with her parents, who are obviously in a very bad way. And 5 days after Stephanie's kidnap, he rings. He rings her parents. It's 2:00 on a Sunday, and he calls their house. He plays a tape recording of Stephanie down the phone to them. And in that recording, she mentions the result of a football match that was the previous day. So they know that, this was a recent recorded message from Stephanie. She says that she's not been harmed and that she is okay. 7 days after Stephanie's kidnap, so 2 days later, 2 days after she's called her parents, the kidnapper calls Kevin Watts. He demands the $175,000 for the following day. So that would be day 8. After making that phone call, after a week in captivity, he gets 2 mattresses out and he puts them in the warehouse and he lets Stephanie sleep on a mattress that night. And he sleeps on one next to her. Why? Is it like this is going to be the last night that he has with her? So he wants to be near her? I'm not sure. But that's what he does. And he also, interestingly, I find this interesting too, he asks Stephanie if they can do what they did on the first night, which was, not sleep together because he raped her, but he wanted to do that again, basically. And she said no. And he said, okay. So it really does feel like over that week in captivity, Stephanie has really gained his respect and they do have a certain rapport. On the 29th of January, 8 days after Stephanie has been kidnapped, the kidnapper goes off in the morning. He leaves her. He puts her in her box and says that he will be back later by 8 or 9 o'clock and that then she will be set free. So that is a very, very long day for Stephanie. She's put into her box in the morning, her horrible, painful box, and she knows that she will be there until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Now, again, I did not know that this really happened. Maybe it doesn't now, I don't know, but it did then. I thought this was just in films. I don't know how I thought it would go down, but in my head, I was like, nah, they don't do that. But they really did actually ask Kevin Watts, the manager of Shipways, to do the ransom drop. So he had to do it. Now, he was in a lot of danger and he knew it. His wife knew it. He had children. He was in danger. He had to go and drop off this huge amount of money to, well, I don't know if he knew it, but the police certainly knew that he was a known killer. Kevin has to follow a trail of instructions, as you do with a ransom drop. She says like she knows, but literally it's like watching a film. It's exactly the same. He's done a trail The idea is to shake the police, because it's like, go here, do this, go to this phone box. Mainly sort of phone boxes, go to here, and then in each phone box you'll get a phone call or there'll be a letter and stuff like that. It really is just out of this world, like unbelievable. Who does this? And this is what this guy has set up. So this has been like weeks in the making. He's had to think about it, plan the trail. At one point he sends poor Kevin to like Sheffield. So it's a real, a real long slog. It goes on all day. Again, you could not write this, because by the time they get to the evening, a fog descends. Thick fog, you can't really see very far in front of you. So keeping Kevin under surveillance is like, and they lose him. They lose sight of him and they lose him. Not to worry, you say, because he's got one of those, they've got comms, so he can hear them in his ear, and like he's got a microphone in his car or in his person, so they are in constant communication. So he can say, oh, okay, you can't see me, I'm here, or I'm going here, or, oh, I'm in this place, until that breaks. Until that breaks. So now he is completely on his own, and he doesn't even know. He doesn't realise that the communication thing has broken. He has no idea. So he's still yakking away. The last instruction that he got, the police have no idea what it says. They don't know, because they've lost communications. So they can't see him and they don't know where he's going at all. So he is gone. He's gone into the night. Little did they know that he has been taken to a small lane. And at the end of this lane is a sign that somebody's written that says Shipways, and then an arrow, and it directs him down this lane. And he feels incredibly vulnerable. But don't forget, though, he does think that the police are like following, because the idea is that they will be following him and they will arrest the kidnapper when he goes to get the money that he drops off. Why couldn't they just have someone hidden in the boot of his car? That's what I would do. Have a little person just in the boot of the car, just for safety, but no. As he drives along this very dark, foggy road, like lane, small lane, he's very aware that like this killer, well, he doesn't know he's a killer, but this guy could just jump out at any time and just, and then he reaches a cone in the road, so he has to get out of his car. I don't know if I don't think my legs would work. I think they'd just be like, nope. So he gets out of his car, brave man, and he goes to the cone and he reads the instructions, which say, take the money and put it into this bag, so move the money from one bag to this bag, and then put the bag of money on the wooden tray and leave it there and then drive off. So this is the instructions, and Kevin does it, and he does it at the speed of light because he's petrified. And I'll share a picture of where he is at this point, because it just feels oppressive and it feels scary as hell, let alone like with a fog, and it just feels terrifying. So I'd be quick too. And he'd even missed something. There was something else on the instructions that he didn't read because he was so scared. So he did all of that and then he drove off. When he is gone, the kidnapper is down underneath the money. So in the picture that I showed, there's these walls. So as far as Kevin was aware, he was just sort of like, he'd driven into a walled bit of lane, but actually the other side of those walls was just a big drop, like 60-foot drop. So where he'd placed the money in this wooden tray, oh, my eyes crossed. The wooden tray, please don't make noises, it freaks me out. Is it the dog? He's snoring away, bless him. The tray had a rope tied to it. So the kidnapper down below just pulls on the rope and down comes the money. The police are nowhere to be seen. They have lost Kevin. Kevin has driven away. The kidnapper has all of the money. He checks it for a bug. There is no bug. He jumps on his moped and off he goes with £175,000. The police officers involved were utterly bereft. Some would later on go to say that this was just the worst time in their careers. They felt like they had just signed Stephanie's death warrant and handed over £175,000. At this point, because everything had been delayed, Kevin was late, mainly because of the fog and things like that, and just pure panic, I think. He was late, and so was the kidnapper. And at that point, Stephanie, I don't know how she knew what the time was. Did she? She had a blindfold on, maybe the radio. I think that was how she knew what the time was, because in interviews she seemed to know the times of things, and I think she did know because of the radio. So she knew that it had well gone past 8-9 o'clock, and she thought that he'd left her there to die. She was beside herself. She hurt herself trying to free herself from the box. She also thought that she couldn't just wait to starve to death. She was like, no, I'm going to do it on my terms. And she tried to put her blanket and things like that. I think at this point he'd given her some things to keep her warm. And she was trying to use those to suffocate herself. And then it wasn't long after that he returned. The kidnapper returned, and she was beside herself. She could not. She'd gotten herself into she thought that was it. She was very, very weak because she had spent hours trying to free herself from the box. She also knew now that her captor had his money. So this was, what's going to happen? Is this the end, or am I going home? He then started to get things ready. Get stuff ready, get her ready. And then he told her that he had decided that he was going to take her home. Like it was some sort of like gift to her. He even said that he wanted to take her home because he didn't want anything bad to happen to her. So he was going to take her home. What? Don't want something bad to happen to her. You are bad. You are the bad in the world. This is the worst thing that could have happened to her. And it's you taking her home so that she's safe. What? He said, I thought about dropping you off at a phone box so that you can just call the police and they could pick you up. But then I thought, I'd have to leave a knife with you so that you could protect yourself from bad people. What is this guy on? You have stripped everything away from this woman at this point. You've done the worst, other than ending her life. You've done everything that you can. The worst. Bang. And then at midnight, 8 days after she had been abducted, Stephanie was dropped off on the road of her parents' house. 8 days of pure in that horrible box. The police launched a nationwide appeal for this guy, and they had Stephanie, so she must have seen him because she was able to do a sketch. So at some point she has seen his face. She was able to remember loads of stuff about where she was kept, what she could hear, what he was like. She mentioned that he must be a fan of the railway. That's interesting as well, isn't it? Because Matey Boy has tried to extort £200,000 from the railway. And actually, when I thought about it, there's a lot of, like, in other, his other crimes, he's like hung something from the railway line, or he's collecting money from the railway line. It's always centred around like the railway. She said he wore a railway badge on a jacket, and that he talked about the railway a lot, like he was a fanatic. Again, like last week's show, the case was covered on Crime Watch. And they released the recordings of his voice because he'd called people left, right and centre, hadn't he? He wasn't just letters, he was ringing. Shouldn't have used the phone, should have stuck to letters, silly. But so they had his voice. And also witnesses saw Stephanie get dropped off the night, after her abduction, after 8 days. And it was a red, like, mini metro. I'll share a picture if I can because they were cool. It was a red mini metro. So they have all this information about this dude. And a woman comes forward called Susan who says, that is my ex-husband. Thank you, please. Enter Michael Sams. Police immediately dispatch officers to Michael Sam's address. He's not home, but his wife is. And his wife says, "Oh, hi, I was expecting you." Really? Yeah. "Oh, he said that you would come because of the car." And they had watched Crime Watch that evening, the evening before. They'd watched it together, having a cup of tea. And I mean, when you see the sketch and the picture of him, it's like, yeah, it's you. What was his wife? Is she a bit dim? Because he said, like, "Oh, they'll probably come because I've got a red Metro. How about they're going to come because that's your face? Also, that's your voice." Like, really? But she was quite blasé. "Oh, yeah, because of the car. Because of the car." No. He's not home, but she gives the police his work address. And when they arrive, they know that this is their guy. Because everything that Stephanie has shared it's just like walking through her memory, walking through what she said. She described how the road sort of like slanted down and then turned into gravel, how there was a big door, like a metal thing, how you walked in and it was one type of floor and then another type of floor, and this was all true. And then there was a microwave, there was a fish tank, like I think the fish tank was at his house with the grey pot, so that's tying him to Julie Dart's case. Oh, excuse me, getting excited. There wasn't a till, and they were like, "Oh, that's," because she kept hearing it, like she'd hear a ding every now and then, like she thought it was an old till, so like when you press enter and it opens, it goes ding. But then one of the police officers left the building and it was a ding on the door, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, we think we've got this man." They also went back into the warehouse. It's just as she had described. And it really wasn't long after he'd been arrested that he confessed to her kidnap. Sam's was an arrogant man. He was also a very intelligent man. He thought himself a clever so-and-so, and he was quite obsessed with, like, outwitting the system, whatever, in whatever way. He had talked as well before with somebody about committing the perfect crime. And, and that involved kidnap and things like that. He also was a fanboy of Dennis Nielsen, red flag, and also train robbers. It took him a while to confess to Julie Dart's murder because he didn't want to, and he was always playing games with the police. They had so many interviews. He would say something, they would prove him wrong, and then he would go away, think about it, come back, and he really played games with them. He'd also buried a lot of the money, and he insisted that there was another man involved, that it wasn't just him. And he had also talked to Stephanie as well about there being an accomplice, but she never saw this person, never ever, only him. And he maintained that he had somebody with him, and that somebody was the person that did all of the horrible stuff. He was the person that killed Julie. It wasn't him, it was his accomplice. And anything that was like grim, like basically it wasn't him, it was this guy. And because they didn't have all the money, he said, like, "Why would I not have all of the money? I've paid this guy, he took half of the money." So it was a shame because they didn't have the money. Eventually they found the money, and they found all of the money. So that killed that for him, because it was like, no, you had the money, you buried the money, you worked alone. Why would an accomplice leave their money buried? No, they would not. When he confessed eventually to Julie Dart's murder, he said that his intention had always been to murder her. It was not about the kidnap. She was a trial run, and he wanted to kidnap somebody, he wanted to hold somebody, and then he wanted to murder them. He wanted to do the whole process. And that the idea was that he was going to murder Stephanie as well, but she won him over. He felt like she deserved to live. Forensics turned up loads of stuff. They found Julie's hair at the workshop. So she had been there. So that tied Julie to the workshop and to Sam's. They also found the blue, really rare bricks You know, the white painted brick from the Julie Dart case, they found that there, or some of them. So that again tied Julie's case to Sam's. A handwriting expert was brought in and they confirmed that he had written the Royal Mail, is not what I mean, British Rail letters, Julie Dart letters and Stephanie's letters. Tied him in a bow. In one of his interviews, he used a word that I have not heard for so long. And when he said it in his interview, I was like, I'm bringing that word back, even though I'm annoyed that it came out of the mouth of a killer. But it's a brilliant word, nonetheless. It's pillock. Who says that anymore? Oh, you pillock. But I'm going to, because my granddad used to say pillock all the time. And I was like, when I heard it, I was like, oh, pillock, such a good word. What a pillock. Yeah, bringing it back. Resurrecting. In 1993, Sams was given 4 life sentences. He was found guilty of blackmailing British Rail, murdering Julie Dart, and kidnapping and imprisoning Stephanie. Stephanie went on to write a book about her experiences. It's called Beyond Fear, My Will to Survive. She also went on to help victims of kidnap and the police to give them better support after the ordeal that they have gone through. She described how Sams stole 20 years of her life because she didn't just come home and just get on with it. She was traumatised. This ruined her life. He took 20 years of her life. She was scared. She was traumatised. Traumatised is the only word you can use there, really. She struggled so much to just overcome that experience. And it really is just a horrific, traumatic experience to live through. She did interviews and things like that over the years. When she was about 45, this is when she decided she was going to begin her life. She was going to move on and live her life and try and leave this behind her. And very, very tragically, she passed away when she was 50 years old from cancer. I read that Sams had applied for parole at some point recently. I think he's 80 or something now, and they were like, no. So he's still in prison. I hope he does stay there until he dies. I think he will. Like I say, unbelievable case. And it's just very sad. It makes me very angry. Very. That is all I have for you on today's case. Very quickly, so as not to bore you. And also, it was nothing too dramatic, but the car broke down. The car had to go to a garage, which is quite far away. So we've had lots of sort of trips, lots of logistics to work out with, got kids in different schools, different jobs, different places. Like that in itself is just a headache that you don't need in your life, isn't it? And then in the midst of all of that, the dog got really sick. Really sick. I've never seen him so sick, but really sad. It's sad for him. He's been wheezing and trembling, really poorly. Yesterday, I was like, is he, how is this going to pan out? So he is off to the vets today. He's had to be sedated because they need to really, I think they need to really look in his ear, and dogs don't like that, do they? And he can be quite a waspy dog. Because of that, and because of all of the journeys to this blimmin' garage, waste of time, waste of my time, don't need it going on. But because of all of that and all of the other stuff that just has to happen in your life anyway, I was like, when am I going to have time to do this? When am I going to sit down and film? So I was like, let's make this work. So it had to be today. It had to be in the morning, hence the coffee. And it had to be inside because I feel sad for Hank. I feel really sad for him. He's really not happy. And I've made him a little den. I've got the door open. I can see his little putchy face and he can hear me talking away. I'm just company. So I didn't want to go and shut myself up the shed and leave him. I wanted to be here. And then we're going to take him to the vets. And I will be having a gin tonight, as I would have done if I was filming this evening. But there is not enough time in this week. I haven't even picked up a university book this week. Not once. I hate cars. It's official. I hate them. Right, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go and snuggle with the dog in his den. It sounds like I've done some elaborate affair. Have not. It is literally old blankets and towels and a yoga mat folded in half. But he's loving it, and it's all like cushy, cushy, cushy. Because I think dogs like dens. They had dens in the wild, didn't they? You know, back in the day. And I was like, I'm just going to make him so comfy, super comfy. And it looks inviting, so I might just go and lay my head near him for a bit. Just, yeah, have a moment with the pooch. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. Hope you can join me next week, snore, for another true crime story in a glass, or a vase, or a mug, or a jug, or a snug in a bug. Coffee, gin, vodka, beer, whatever you fancy. Right, love you all. See you next week. Bye.